staggering 84% of the world's population is religious. But what is it that has driven us to find meaning in the great divine? To help unravel the believing brain, we're joined this morning by one of the smartest people in the world, Professor Greene. Welcome back, Professor. I find this topic fascinating. But when you were here with us before, you explained a major scientific idea called string theory in the simplest way. Why have you now turned science into discussing religion?
Well, I think it's a deep question. Can we use science to explain things that are so profoundly important to everyday life? And so we have this program up at the World Science Festival in Brisbane this week where we're going to explore, can science give us some understanding of why so many of us, as you mentioned, look out to the world and want there to be some kind of force beyond the everyday that gives meaning or shapes the lives that we lead.
But is it some kind of security, do you think?
I think that's certainly part of it, and many people would turn to that as an explanation for why they do believe. But science is beginning to show that the very qualities of the human brain that allowed us to survive over the last few 100,000 years. We're creative, we want to push the boundaries of understanding, we love to tell stories, group cohesion is vital to our survival. Those very qualities set us up for being receptive to ideas of religion. So it may be that evolution itself gives an explanation of why so many of us have an inclination to believe in something supernatural.
So Brian, why does the human race need religion?
I don't know that it does. And I would actually flip the question around. It may be that the things that allowed us to survive set us up for religion, as opposed to religion itself being an integral part of why we are who we are.
But it's certainly true that the human race, it seems, as long as we've defined ourselves as humans, that we have needed to believe in something. The earliest known artefacts are burial sites where people have been given tokens to take into an afterlife. Some people have suggested that the fact that we were the first animals to be able to walk just on our hind legs, to see the horizon, to contemplate the world from a different angle means that suddenly it opens our minds to other possibilities.
Absolutely.
And others have suggested we're the only species that knows we're going to die.
Absolutely.
And to deal with that inevitability,
Yes.
you almost need to create something to make that bearable.
Yes. Absolutely. It's terrifying, right? We live in these worlds, right? We have friends, we have family, we do things that we think are important, and then to have the recognition that no other animal does, that it's all going to end, that there's going to be an end to our existence, that's terrifying. Now, most of us paper it over. Right? We don't go around every day, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, right? We find ways of coping. But indeed, it could be that early on, I mean, the Sungir burial site in Russia, 40,000 years ago, we were giving artifacts that took hours and hours of work to create these artifacts to bury with the dead. Why were we spending time to give artifacts to the dead if we didn't think that there was something else beyond?
Well, on the off chance there might be something else.
Yes, well, look, and I'm all for that. I mean, I'm actually not religious, but every time I say that, I'm happy to look up and say, sorry, because I'm hedging my bets, just in case there is somebody out there. Right.
Yes. Sometimes I look up to heaven and talk to my brother. You know, so something inside of me thinks, you know, Will's up there somewhere. And it's weird, but I do. I say, yeah, listen, Will, and I have a conversation with him.
I think many of us do. I mean, you know, my dad died 30 years ago, and rationally, I know he's gone, but emotionally, I talk to him, and I imagine that he's out there, and I think that may be part of the very same evolutionary lineage that we're referring to. That's how we've coped.
And so in that sense, is it true that we actually do need some type of religion? Because life would be unbearable if we knew that it was all just for nothing, that we were just going to be eaten by worms, or that all the people we loved have just disappeared into nothing. And even atheists will say things like, oh, well, he hasn't really gone because he lives on in our hearts, and things like that. So there's always some kind of...
I would just frame it a little bit differently. I don't know that we necessarily need religion. I think many of us do use religion in that way, but we need something that can give coherence to the very strange fact that we are thrust into this world, and yet we know that our time here is so short and ephemeral. So what can provide that meaning? For some it's religion, for some it's work, for some it's they create art, great art that they think that will outlast them. So I think there are many ways of coping.
And some people try and organise their wills and their estate so that they leave something wealth behind so that they hope that they will be remembered.
Absolutely. So great wealth is another way to assure a certain kind of legacy. So I think all of us, many of us, I don't want to speak for everybody, but many of us have a need to outlast our own finite biological time that we're given.
Well, sometimes I look at my arm and I can see that my daughter has this shape arm and I can see that my granddaughter does.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I think, I'm living on. That's how I'm doing it.
And you can even be scientific about that. I mean, they've got half of your genes, right?
Yeah.
So half of your genes are propagating. And that is, in fact, what we're talking about when we're saying there's an evolutionary basis for these kinds of inclinations, right? I mean, survival of the fittest drives us to want to persist. And the way we persist is by making sure that our genes go on to the next generation. And it could be that religion is vital to that, because religion allowed large groups of hunter-gatherers to come together and work together.
Community.
And a community allowed them to survive. To survive means to pass on your genes. And therefore the next generation is going to want to have the same kinds of beliefs because it will allow them to persist as well.
Yeah, my son's got my toes. I don't know if he's real happy about
that. Shannon made the great point that religion will always be a central part of human existence until we discover life on other planets.
You really think that would make a difference?
Well, I suppose it can no longer just be one God who's
but
putting the human race.
But there's no longer one God here. There are over 4,000 religions practiced on planet Earth today. Even in Christianity, right? There are 33,000 denominations. So there's not a unity even here on planet Earth.
No, but most of those religions are monotheistic religions that
they're different.
That presuppose that the human is the sort of God's creation. If suddenly there's a six-legged green thing, that must either also be God's creation and we're not so special anymore, or there is no God and it's
or
just
I think that we'll just rationalize it away and our beliefs will probably persist.
We'll just go to war with them.
Brian, we could talk to you all day. We need to have this discussion over a couple of wines and
Absolutely.
a dinner party.
Well, join us in Brisbane. We'll have the program and then we can have that dinner afterwards.
And on that point, Brian, you can catch up with Brian and all the other super smarties. You can head to the World Science Festival, as he mentioned, in Brisbane. It starts today and runs until Sunday. Brian's The Believing Brain will be on Saturday. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great conversation.